And so obviously there's a rising cost issue, but there's also local control concerns. This photograph illustrates, I think, some of the other pretty dramatic illustration of some of the northern communities in northern Manitoba and northern Ontario that drive their diesel fuel in winter roads. A couple of years, my colleague Paul's in the back there, we worked with some remote communities in northern Ontario, northern Manitoba. Their diesel fuel wasn't getting in because the roads just never froze. Well, they froze, but they obviously didn't freeze enough. And so they basically, instead of being able to truck all the diesel fuel in, they had to fly it in. And you can imagine the different costs of flying diesel fuel versus being able to truck it in. So, and that's happening more and more often with roads either having a much shorter season or in some cases not freezing to strength at all. There was one community I remember was up there. It was St. Teresa Point. We were up sort of northern Manitoba, and it was a year they weren't sure if the roads were going to make it or not. And so I think they had 32 of these trucks sort of lined up in Winnipeg, waiting for the go-ahead. And the moment they thought the roads were going to be cold enough, that entire fleet was going to go. But you can imagine the opportunity cost of having 32 18-wheelers lined up and sort of idling, waiting to head up north for a small community of only a few hundred people. At the end of the day, these are big costs, I guess, is what I'm trying to suggest. So obviously there's an interest in reducing energy costs. There's an interest in looking for energy independence from these communities. These are some photographs of some of those communities we've worked with. Obviously, the energy cost issue is not as real in rural communities, but it's obviously accentuated or acute in remote communities. Looking for local job creation is obviously another important aspect of developing renewables or looking for alternatives. Lessening the impact on the environment, and so I think a lot of those remote communities, I think there's no awareness in some of those communities about issues of winter roads not freezing, that they are in some ways a part of the problem because they're running on diesel generators. And obviously it's a small part of the problem, but I think there's a consciousness or a cognizance of we want to be a part of the solution, and we don't want to be, we want to show that we can also contribute to the solution. But at the same time, another real serious issue in those communities is these diesel farms. So you've got these giant tanks of diesel fuel that sit there all year long. We were in Cayuga, and one of those had been leaking for years, and they didn't know, and it had a big plume of diesel fuel underneath the band office, and basically contaminated and condemned the entire office. And so there's other real acute issues as well as the global warming issue. There's trucking in this amount of diesel fuel every year can be a serious problem. So, as I said, going back to the same slide I showed a moment ago, there are ways that rural communities, obviously there's opportunities, there's interest, there's some risks, and some countries have done a whole lot to foster rural and local development of renewable energy technologies, but other countries haven't. In Canada, we have almost none of the renewable energy that's developed, or from wind power point of view anyway. I think that's the only turbine. Oh, there's another one. So there's two turbines in Canada that are owned cooperatively. That's one in downtown Toronto, and there's another one up in Dawson Creek, Trees Energy Co-op. So we've got two turbines compared to Germany and Denmark that have a whole percentage of their national fleet, I guess, is owned cooperatively. And you may or may not want to do that, but I'm just suggesting that there are different models to encourage that if that's what you want to do. The UK is in the same situation as Canada, and so is Spain, where there isn't a whole lot of local ownership. So you can see that obviously there's different ways to develop these technologies in terms of local ownership or in terms of local buy-in. But really, why that happens is because of policy. And policy drives whether it's the development of the technology, but also the ownership models of these technologies. And these are some examples, pretty dramatic ones, I think. This is the United States of just policy in general, not looking at remote and rural communities, but just looking at policy in general. You can see the blue bars show the amount of wind power installed in the United States in those particular years. The red arrows here show, these three arrows anyway, show the years that the renewable energy incentive was not renewed in the United States. So you can sort of see what's happened when there was an absence of policy in the country. And then here it was actually extended for a few years, and Obama extended it for another 3 years in the United States since it's become. Interestingly, even though the United States, so they had this funny up and down development, they still were one of the larger players in terms of wind power installed globally. But because they'd had this up and down development, up until really last year, there had been no manufacturing capacity in the United States at all. It was all parts and all of the turbines were coming from Europe because of this instability in the market, and none of the manufacturers wanted to set up shop. Even GE, a large American company, manufactures their turbines in Germany. They were just, the market was so uncertain in the United States. That's subsequently changed, and now that the market looks big and stable in the States, we're starting to see a huge amount of manufacturing happen there. But they were basically 10 years behind. If they didn't have some of these ups and downs, I think you would have seen the manufacturing develop in the United States a lot earlier. This is a Canadian context, and we have a nice smoother graph, fortunately. But you can really see there's two interesting things. You can see this is wind power development in Canada. The Alberta market deregulated around this point in time, and that's when you can see some of the first wind capacity come online. But then it didn't. There was a couple of really, really windy spots in Alberta and a couple of companies that wanted to try it out. So there was some early adopters, but really the market in Canada didn't take off until the first federal incentive was put in place by NRCan. And that's when you see a huge amount of development take off, and now we're up in this range here. You can see this is an interesting point here. This is when the government changed hands and the incentive was put on hold for a few months. And you can see there's some uncertainty in the market in terms of things slowed down a little bit, and then the incentive was reinstated, and the development took off again. That incentive actually has come to the end of its life in the last budget, so it'll be interesting to see where development goes in Canada going forward. But the point of these graphs here is to show that policy really does drive this development. It really is governments that help get out in front of this stuff. So that's my preamble to the study that we did for Agriculture Canada, looking at specifically looking at remote and rural communities and how they can benefit from renewable energy development. And so what we looked at is we looked at policies across Canada, the different provinces, some in the United States, across Northern Europe and Australia, and looking at evaluating policies for renewable energy development and evaluating them in terms of how well they, how successful they were in delivering renewables to not only to remote and rural communities, but really engaging those communities in the development as well. It was a difficult study to do because there were very few policies that were actually aimed at doing that specifically. And so it was, in some ways, it was looking at general policies and seeing how well that happened as a corollary, but not necessarily as an explicit goal of those policies. So some of the barriers that were common to renewable energy development anywhere is the infrastructure, in terms of being able to get onto the grid, in terms of infrastructure locally, in terms of being able to actually to build these types of machinery or these types of equipment. Policy instability was a big problem, and there's unpredictability, because these projects can take many, many years to develop. A wind energy project is one of the faster projects, and they tend to take 2 to 3 years to get online. If you're thinking about the American context of the policy, they're 1 year, not the next year, they're the 1 year. It's pretty hard to do some of that upfront planning and upfront investment, so stability is obviously a big issue.